afternoon and welcome to this edition of the Middle East and Africa Forum for Sustainability Leaders podcast, a podcast series that explores the great energy transition in the Middle East and Africa and the journey that so many sustainability leaders are making in crafting and adopting sustainability strategies, whether they be public sector, private sector, or individuals for that matter, as we all face the demands of this moment of change. Today on the podcast, we are going to be tackling the question of what is the energy transition role for oil and gas in 2023? And of course, an important question in the year in which one of the world's largest oil and gas producers, the UAE, is hosting the great COP28, the great climate conference. So it is a topical question and a very important one for in some ways, an opportunity for oil and gas to sit at the table and even take a leadership role in this great transformation. Let's start off with our host, Mr. Sharif Tawfiq, the Chief Sustainability Officer for Middle East and Africa in Microsoft, to make some opening statement. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, Sean. So, as everyone knows, the UAE announced the year 2023 as the year of sustainability. And with COP28 approaching, many experts have described it as the energy COP, as it's happening in a region that is home to 50% of the largest oil and gas producers in the world. This industry that is responsible to roughly 70% of the world greenhouse gas emissions. By 2050, the UAE is expected to be 4 degrees Celsius warmer than it is today, twice the global average rate of warming. This is why we see a very strong political will and leadership for countries like UAE and Saudi to take serious steps in the transition to more sustainable forms of energy. And we do expect in COP28 to see more and more announcements related to green policies, regulations, initiatives, and investments commitments. The UAE actually is one of the countries with the least methane emissions. The hydrocarbon industries in the UAE have the world's lowest methane intensities, roughly 0.01%. The culture of innovation is essential for creating more sustainable futures. It is through the innovative thinking and new technologies. It is how we develop new efficient way of producing cleaner energy, innovative new technologies like carbon capture, green hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuel. I look forward to listening to this podcast with our esteemed guests and, of course, you, Sean. So let's dive into it. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you so much, Sharif. Let's kick off with Hanan Bakr, Resilience Finance Lead at the Climate Change High-Level Champions, and soon to join the COP28 presidency team in Abu Dhabi. Hanan, your opening thoughts on this question on what is the energy transition role for oil and gas in 2023? By the sounds of it, a big question you'll be facing over the coming months.
No, actually, it's pretty exciting for the UAE to be the host of COP28, and this is a very strong message from the UAE being a global leader in clean energy. And I think it's not new for UAE. In COP26, we have seen the UAE has already made announcements of their plans to produce 25% of the global hydrogen supply. And we see through Masdar and a lot of JVs with the international players that the UAE is really taking the clean energy production seriously, not to mention as well their investments global wide. So we have seen $16 billion of clean energy investments in 70 countries. UAE is quite pioneer in their investments in renewables, and particularly their focus on the global south countries. So it's not just in the advanced countries. And I think they are making much more commitments in terms of renewables and implementation, not just trillions in the air. They are making serious steps toward that. I personally see that the UAE and the other petrostate nations will be leading the conversation of phasing down fossil fuel. They will take the energy transition and the transition pathways seriously during this COP. Oil and gas companies particularly have the capacity in terms of research and development, in terms of access to capital now to be leading this transition. And hopefully we will see more of the deals coming as we're getting closer to COP28. We have already seen the Peace Energy agreement between the UAE and the US during the ADSW. So this gives you an indication and signals what's coming ahead of our way, and it will be really a competition and a race across the petrostate nations with the renewables. So it's going to be a very interesting COP this year.
COP28, the implementation COP. Chris Wood, CEO of RAC Gas. Of course, every day of the week, you've got to get gas out of the ground and do it as low carbon as possible. What is the energy transition role for oil and gas in 2023, not 2028, but in the year ahead, mean for you, Chris?
Energy transition here in RAC Gas, and clearly Hanan has made a good opening around how important it is that the UAE takes a leading role, and as one of the several NOCs in the UAE, we find it very important to be part of that discussion and see how we bring the energy industry together with the debate to make sure that we have a sustainable solution. For RAC Gas, sustainability for us is about ensuring that we have a sustainable supply of energy. Initially, we're focusing on the transition, how we ensure that we can decarbonize Ras Al Khaimah, and we have a number of opportunities and customers we're working with at the moment to bring down carbon intensity of Ras Al Khaimah. But if we're looking at RAC Gas alone, we've got a drilling campaign that lasts over the next 3 to 5 years, depending on success. That drilling campaign, that exploration activity, and eventual production, inshallah, will also be at world-class levels. As you said, Sean, we will be looking at reducing and ensuring the lowest methane volumes, losses, and that's very much where we focus on is how do we reduce the losses? How do we make our operations more efficient? How do we get the maximum value out of every molecule that we extract? And then we start looking at how do we educate our communities? How do we energize them? How do we make sure that they understand the importance of consuming energy and molecules efficiently as possible in the future, so we're not wasting those molecules? So for RAC Gas, it's not just about operational efficiency, it's about, which is part of energizing our communities, it's also about educating those communities to make sure that we're responsible consumers as well.
Let's welcome also Justine Roure, Deputy Vice President, Strategy and Policy at the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which of course has been set up to help oil and gas business accelerate the energy transition. Justine, your opening thoughts. We're kind of running out of time here. The oil and gas industry needs to accelerate. Your thoughts?
Yes, I fully agree, and thanks for the invitation. I would jump on what Chris and Hanan share, like around competition between the companies. I think one key aspect as well is the collaboration in the oil and gas industry, which is critical as soon as you bring all the NOCs that are outside, let's say. So within OGCI, so created in 2014, the key aspects I would focus on is that we have 12 member companies. Not only IOCs, we have also NOCs, and this is really valuable for us. We have Petrobras, we have the Chinese, we have also Aramco, which is super important for us. And we have seen since the creation of OGCI, the additionality and the value of sharing the knowledge to lead to a greater competition, let's say, and a cleaner competition. So I would say on top of the competition that hopefully we will see that will bring, the best out of the energy industry, the collaboration is key as well. And I mean, fully aligned with what has been shared in these opening statements around, how to demonstrate what the energy sector can bring. I think for this year specifically, it will be key for the industry to demonstrate the progress and what we can bring in terms of solution. We already mentioned the fact that we have, technologies and skills and know-how on very complicated technologies that will be required and needed in the coming decades. But the question is like, how do we build trust? And Chris, you were mentioning energizing the customers and educating. I would say the education is also among the peers, and to ensure that collectively we manage to demonstrate good results in terms of, for instance, I mean, the critical aspects for us for this COP will be around methane emissions, and how do we make sure that we reduce as much as possible these emissions.
Justine, I just want to follow up. In your mission statement, I mean, the front page of your website, it's all about facilitating or aiding oil and gas companies to accelerate. I wanted you to address that point about the urgency here. We've got BNP Paribas just this week committing to slash oil lending by 80% by 2030, one of France's biggest banks. So could you just address that point of accelerate? What does that mean for OGCI and what does it mean for NOCs, do you think?
So within OGCI, we renewed the strategy in 2021, so September 2021. And I think this strategy is quite powerful because it basically encompassed what we have been, discussing here is of course, building on, the supporting the Paris Agreement and its aim. All of our member companies, including the NOCs, have a net zero commitment on the operated assets. So it means that I think in terms of signal, it's quite powerful to demonstrate that it's actually feasible to have NOCs that commit to such a target. And then so this is like the first pillar of the strategy. And then the second pillar, which is critical, is around how do we embark the rest of the industry, because we do recognize that, if we want to succeed in terms of tackling the climate change, it's not only the 12 member companies, which is, even if it's 30% of the production, it's still only 30% of the production, and we are missing, the 70 remaining percent. So how do we embark and how do we influence the industry at large? And the third pillar is like, how do we bring the solutions that the society will need to win this battle? So in terms of, balance, it's like OGCI membership, let's say it's around 1 gigaton of emissions. As soon as you take the oil and gas industry at large, we are talking about 4 gigatons. And if you consider the society and, the solutions, we are talking roughly around 16 gigatons. So I think on our side, it has been critical to demonstrate that basically we can progress together, and that actually everything that is implemented within OGCI can definitely be, expanded and spread and have like impacts outside of the boundaries. I was talking about, the methane aspect, which is for us critical. And in March last year, we launched, aiming for zero methane emission initiatives.
Certainly methane is a very big target, and you've mentioned it, and Chris has mentioned it. Hanan, I wanted to bring you back into the conversation vis-a-vis this sort of and strategy that was articulated recently by His Excellency Sultan Al Jaber at ADIPEC, obviously the CEO of ADNOC, Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology in the UAE. The combination of keeping people, planet and profit front and center, that one can advance the NOCs and the oil and gas sector can bring all of these aspects forward at the same time. What underpins that strategy and? Because it doesn't sound like the banks are very convinced by this argument at this time.
Well, actually, I can't yet comment on these strategies, to be honest, as well, Sean, because as we speak, this type of narrative that you're alluding to, it's still in progress. However, I need as well to focus over here on the economic imperative, if you like, on the clean energy technologies, right? Because we usually, when we mention climate change, we're always talking about the dark side of the moon. We always talk about the negative consequences, and then decarbonization is inevitable for the environment. But there is a huge miss out on the business case for the clean energy technologies and the investment. And when we consider the business case usually for renewable investment, you're looking at 4 elements over here: cost, energy security, environment, and loss of jobs. So I would like as well to share with you some numbers to sound convincing to you and to the audience on the imperative. And I would like to use my cheat sheet as well to be accurate in my numbers. So when it comes to cost, the renewable power is the cheapest power source in 90% of the world. So the cost of clean energy technologies has fallen by around 60 to 90% over the last 10 years. When you break it down by type of renewable source, onshore wind 59%, offshore wind 61%, solar 89%, batteries 83%. Moving to the second point, which is the energy security. 90% of people live in countries with abundant renewable energy, and most of the sources of energy demand growth are in fossil fuel importing countries, mainly China and India, and both of which face rising dependency on oil and gas imports. Thirdly, the environment, which is of course out of question. Renewables ecological footprint is 100 times lower than fossil fuels. Then lastly, on the loss of jobs. Usually when we think of the transition, and usually oil and gas particularly, they think of losing all of these jobs and skills. However, the IEA calculates that there are already more jobs in clean energy than in fossil fuels, and an energy transition would mean a net gain of 22 million jobs, which tells us as well as an important country for fossil fuel that the import bills that you pay today for the importing of the oil and gas, you can literally pay it as a local salary when you are investing and growing the investment in renewables and the clean energy technologies.
It's certainly clearly an economic opportunity of a grand scale, isn't it? I mean, that's what the UAE has recognized. It says Masdar is now over 15 years old, and the recent announcement by ADNOC and others to invest heavily in the renewable space is a massive economic opportunity as well, Chris, a climate imperative, of course, the combination of profit and the climate together. But Chris, I wanted to get your thoughts more specifically on the year that's in it. We start the year with a slight credibility gap in the oil and gas space to be hosting such a major event as COP28. And I wondered from your perspective to comment a little bit beyond your own wheelhouse of RAC gas, but also for the industry as a whole, of what could be achieved, what should be achieved in the coming months in order to set up a credibility, to close that credibility gap ahead of COP28, so the wider stakeholder group are willing to listen and embrace the industry sitting alongside them at the table. For example, you mentioned methane levels. A big impact on reducing methane, for example, could be a part of that credibility gap closer. Your thoughts on what could be done in the coming months?
Not to want to disagree with you, Sean, but I have a slightly different view. I think we've entered the year with an increased credibility, partly driven by the unfortunate war in the Ukraine. And I think the energy industry has stepped up and created a sustainable and filled the gaps on the energy systems when there was a strain. And I think that's important to recognize that we're on a transition. We've recognized there's a program that we need to invest in, that we're going to need to educate people in, and we're going to have to make it affordable. And that was taught last year, that it needs to be affordable, needs to be available, and we need to understand that the energy industry, and this is why I welcome the Middle East leading the next COP, because it brings the energy industry into the equation and into the discussion on how do we create that sustainable transition as we're moving from a sort of high carbon energy source to a lower carbon or low carbon net zero target in the future. So I think we've gained a lot of credibility, maybe not on delivery as of January 1st of projects, but as Hanan mentioned in the beginning, the UAE have made several big announcements this month around projects that are being invested. They have some of the lowest solar energy production costs in the world, which they're translating into producing hydrogen, and have done deals with Europe to supply them hydrogen, and will become one of the major hydrogen suppliers in the world. Now, not saying hydrogen will be the answer for everything, and I agree with what Justine was saying earlier. There needs to be an investment across all technologies, from CCUS to hydrogen to biofuels.
If you could speak a little bit more specifically to that. Of course, there is the renewable space, Chris, but there is the decarbonization of operations. There is methane reduction. There is carbon capture sequestration. These are some very big opportunities that have been long in the pipeline, but not necessarily scaled to full impact. I'm wondering where you see that opportunity. Again, you mentioned methane in your opening comment, that moving the dial on these pieces, particularly methane and CCUS.
So on the methane side, it's a technology improvement. It's an operational improvement that requires the technology to identify and manage how the containment of in the operation. I'm talking very much around our operations, looking to monitor, manage, and invest in improving how we build our processing, distribution, and storage systems to support the energy supply to the customers. So from that point of view, we're investing, and at this point in time, we're looking at investing in new trains, new distribution grids in Ras Al Khaimah. And again, I'm talking to myself here, not the broader market, but I think globally, that's what's happening. It's what I see happening when I talk to my other peers in the industry, is we're investing a lot of CapEx into making our assets safer, more efficient, and monitoring our methane leaks, and then investing in how we do our, for example, I go to intelligent pigging. We're investing in new systems to launch those pigs, so we're not releasing methane when we're doing those pigging operations. So there is a partnership with our technical partners to invest in our assets, upgrade our assets, and where we have the opportunity to replace old inefficient assets to ensure that a methane molecule that is spent millions of dollars extracting out the ground actually gets to its final destination and gets used for the right purpose rather than being lost on the way.
Justine, ADNOC have been leaders in this space of lower methane intensity. They've targeted 0.15% by 2025, which has earned them a gold standard category by the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0, a UN agency. How important is it for you and your members to take leadership, particularly on the NOC side, where the IOCs are sort of affected by different influences, but on the NOC side, a real opportunity here this year to lead on the energy transition?
Yeah, and I mean, that's a key aspect actually. And building on what Chris was mentioning, one of the key aspects we've seen as critical for the NOCs and outside of OGCI, let's say, is the data and the access to the knowledge. Because basically, yes, if you consider the oil and gas, the OGCI member companies, we had, set up the target on methane back in 2018. We reached the target and we are on track.
And does all of your members, do all of your members have to meet a standard, yes, a common standard?
Yes, all of the members of OGCI, they do comply to the target, which was set in 2018, from 0.3 to 0.2 to well 0.2, well below 0.2, and all of them collectively they reduced by 40% the methane emission. So it's already happening within OGCI. The question again with the NOCs is, how do we, educate and how do we share? And so back in 2021, we launched a satellite campaign with a satellite provider. We started with Iraq. And it was so successful, actually, that we expanded to Kazakhstan, Algeria, Egypt. And the idea is to just contract with a satellite provider that will basically cover specific assets with a specific frequency. And basically, we released already the paper on Iraq. So all of the results are, outside and public. And like, even if it's not, in terms of order of magnitude, in some specific assets, we were around 1,500 kilograms of methane per hour. This is enormous. This is really big. And so we've seen that with the data, the engagement, which can take a long time, of course, with the operators and the local companies, we've seen these plumes of methane disappeared. And so we do think that within OGCI, we have like a role to play to run this kind of the data campaign, to identify, where are the big plumes, and then to share again the knowledge that our members have been building, over the past few years and decades, and share, what can be done, how do you lit the flare, or, how do you track the methane emissions and so on. And this is the approach that we have been launching with the Aiming for Zero that we launched last year, and the satellite and everything, and the long-term engagement that OGCI can support with the member companies on their own. It's quite heavy. They do support with their local presence, but OGCI contributes and coordinates and bring the data again outside.
Hanan, of course, the implementation COP 2023. If 2022, besides COVID and the war in Ukraine and all of those terrible challenges the world face, hydrogen certainly seemed to be the word of 2022. But decarbonization strikes me as being a very central word for 2023 across all sectors, but obviously the oil and gas sector. Your thoughts on how important that configures into the challenge and the opportunity for the oil and gas sector, the energy transition? We're already seeing Abu Dhabi lead a bit on decarbonization, but how central a point and an opportunity is that this year?
So I see this as a two-way relationship. On one hand, if we continue with the current fossil fuel production, we're not meeting the 1.5 Celsius. And if we meeting the 1.5 Celsius and the Paris Agreement levels, then we are going to see infrastructure in the oil and gas and the assets become stranded. However, the dilemma as well that the new oil and gas investments on the short term could look flourishing a lot of the petrostate countries' GDP. However, if we look at the medium to long term, these assets will become even more stranded, not just the assets, the people as well, because the future is definitely for the new clean energy technologies. Nobody could stop that from a cost perspective, and from the four elements that I have mentioned above, there is a lot of realization, and particularly building on what Chris mentioned with the Russian-Ukrainian conflict over here, and sadly, a lot of European countries, they have moved back to coal. So everyone is realizing the sustainability of the energy security and where the renewables will come into play over here to ensure energy security. But coming back to the point of the petrostate countries that are relying heavily on the source of income from the hydrocarbon activities. So the vulnerability of these countries as well in terms of their fiscal and trade balances need to be ring-fenced. And if they are already behind the transition pathway, this will lead them to be exposed to what we call disorderly transition. This disorderly transition will be exposing further their fiscal revenues and again, stressing as well and causing loss of jobs in these countries. So it's really inevitable, Sean. It's not a luxury nowadays to be decarbonizing your assets or your oil and gas industry. There are going to be a real fiscal revenue pressures and macroeconomic instabilities in these producing and exporting countries who are not diversifying their economies nowadays to non-fossil fuel sources of income.
There's an incredible statistic I picked up this week over solar demand globally increased 50% in 2022 compared to a 1% growth on average for oil demand. Chris, I wanted to get your thoughts on that question we talked about a little bit earlier. In order to make these changes from an oil and gas transition point of view, access to capital. We referenced there BNP Paribas earlier. European pension funds have put banks on a warning that they have 3 years to get their house in order vis-a-vis their lending book. How significant a challenge is that emerging for operations like yourself to access the capital to continue to deliver the energy the world needs and avoid this disorderly transition that Hanan mentioned?
Sean, thanks for bringing that up, because I think it's a bit premature to take such bold action. I get a bit nervous when I see headlines like that, because we are in a transition process, and to get there is going to take funds. And just to say you're going to slash your investments in the energy sector, and that's what you're saying, you're slashing your investment in the energy sector that is trying to go through a transition, is a bit dangerous, because it'll leave us exposed again. We saw it last year where we had shortages because of underinvestment. We're still facing in the future a lag of investment in energy infrastructure and energy exploration to bring energy for that transition period. So from that point of view, I think from an NOC point of view, it's we're slightly in a better place. IOCs, I think, where they access the capital markets, I think there's going to be some challenges for them. But going forward, I think there needs to be a balance on the conversation, because decarbonization of the energy sector is different to decarbonization of the world, because we need carbon, we need oils, we need gases as feedstocks for the transition. And I'm not talking about fuels, I'm talking about feedstocks for more efficient products, more efficient mobility from that point of view. So we need to be careful we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater on this one when we say that we're going to just stop looking for oil, looking for gas, because unfortunately we need to continue. And I agree with Justine, the circular economy is key. We need to be thinking about how we reuse, recycle, educate along the way, so we become more efficient and we're starting to consume less and less native or virgin hydrocarbons.
Justine, just to take up on that, the move towards the hydrogen opportunity here as part of this, not only decarbonization, but economic opportunity, diversification into climate investments, if you like. Is it viable that this region, the Middle East, could lead globally? I think Hanan mentioned in her opening comment, 25% of global hydrogen production coming out of the UAE. Your thoughts on that as an opportunity in which to balance the portfolio from this region?
So fully agree with Hanan around the potential to lead on hydrogen. One of the key items also that we work on within OGCI is around CCUS. And since 2019, we know we have been launching like a global search of CCUS hubs across the world. So we basically target specific region, and then we deep dive not only around the storage capacities, which is a key factor as well, of course, but also in terms of potentials in terms of super emitters that could be interested by CCUS, in terms of purity of CO2, in terms of having this kind of insight around the potential customers of the
what
CCUS
will be,
hubs.
Justine, what will be the game changer on CCUS? Because it seems we're still struggling to scale that up, and the industry, your members, are really well placed to should be leading on it. It's a great economic opportunity. What's the trigger there that's going to make this a game changer moment on CCUS in particular?
Well, on CCUS, when I joined the GCI back in 2018, there was no CCUS hub or no CCUS projects, like strong projects. Since then, we launched the Kickstarter. We have like OGCI companies, they have announced more than 25 hubs. So obviously it's not going to be built in a minute, of course, but like if you consider the Aramco hub in Dubai, they plan to have up to 9 million tons of CO2 capture in 2027. So it's not, it's quite a short.
5 million in Abu Dhabi.
Exactly. And so so the projects are ongoing. We can talk about the hub in the UK or in Norway with the Northern Lights and so on. So for us, the CCUS activity is ongoing. I mean, to be transparent, we need also a strong, message from the government in terms of policy incentives or mechanisms. Like, whether you consider the US or Europe, or the Netherlands with the Rotterdam port and so on, all of them have set up some specific policy mechanisms that basically support such development. So it's obviously a big help. But if we go back specifically on the Gulf area, for instance, we went through all the storage assessment. We went through all the industry, potential in terms of CO2 captured and so on. And basically, this is one of the biggest and most promising area in terms of CCUS. And therefore, as soon as you have a CCUS, obviously you couple it with the hydrogen, and it's like the blue hydrogen can definitely be the kind of the bridge between now and the full explosion of green hydrogen. So we do see like that if handled properly and set up in the right way, with the CCUS capacities that are existing, the ones that are being, that are under project, and the potential further along, on green hydrogen, we do see kind of, the all bricks are here to basically make this area kind of the one of the leaders on hydrogen.
Hanan, that sounds like a lovely closing comment from Justine. I'd welcome your closing thought on this subject. Obviously, again, coming back to the year that's in it, 2023, COP28, and what opportunity do you think it presents for the energy sector in the region to make these transformational changes? Can it be a catalyst? Is it an opportunity not to be missed?
I think the GCC, and particularly UAE and Saudi, were set the scene for all of the other countries in terms of transition, and will change the negative narrative and stereotype that petrostates are actually cause of pollution and emissions. On the other hand, they need as well to voice the efforts that they've been doing on the recent years in terms of the renewable investments, the great plans in terms of hydrogen and other renewables that I think UAE and Saudi ahead of a lot of other European countries. It's just that you don't see it on the news every day. So I think it's in favor, and we have to really appreciate the efforts of these countries as well in terms of economic diversification and leading other countries as well during this COP, which will be the COP for all, COP of action as well. Moving from a COP of implementation, COP27, we're going to see this COP28. So there is a huge focus on decarbonization, energy transition, green hydrogen, and I think everyone who's really taking this seriously should leverage these platforms and these dialogues and conversation. And I think in this COP, we will see a lot of expertise around the world and a lot of new energy technology. And of course, UAE is already a host for a lot of these platforms where a lot of countries love to show their technologies. And we have seen already Dubai and fintechs and others. So I think it's a great opportunity for all of these countries to showcase, to build these bridges and to seal these business cases and business deals. I always love to see the implementation on climate change, whether it's decarbonization or agriculture, resilience or adaptation, in terms of business deals. This is how you bring all of these commitments into implementation through business deals on the ground. Again, UAE, sorry.
Go ahead, just close it out.
Yeah, again, UAE is one of the most countries that are taking this seriously. And I think the world needs to see what the UAE has been doing all over the years and what are the serious plans in this space. Thank you.
Well, they've certainly proven that sort of walk the walk and talk the talk around solar energy, achieving some of the lowest per kilowatt hour solar power in the world, and continue to do so. Chris, your closing thoughts on that? I mean, in this sort of unique evolution, you talked earlier about the energy security element that rose last year out of the world, out of the Ukraine conflict, and how the energy sector stood up to that. In this moment of great energy transition, in a way, the NOCs, particularly in this region, have an opportunity to lead where their IOC peer group is maybe lacking. You know, the commitment of, let's say, American majors to the transition has been called into question, whereas the NOCs in this region are really showing some leadership. If you could speak to that in your closing comments, and also maybe just widen out the lens, because I know you're also operating in Africa and where that this sort of subject anchors in there, but just speak to the regional NOCs versus the global majors.
Sure, and I think, again, there's some generalization in that. There are some IOCs that are a bit laggards or not at the same place as others. We have strong partnerships here, investing in Ras Al Khaimah with some very big IOCs who bring a lot of knowledge, a lot of technology, and it comes back to what we were saying earlier, and Justine in particular, around knowledge sharing best practice and so forth. So from that point of view, the NOCs certainly can, from the Middle East, can lead and have large balance sheets right now to reinvest in the renewable space. but it's also partnerships with our customers, with our IOCs and NOCs that are in the region to take that forward. And then when we look at our operations in Africa, we want to take that learning with us. And one of the things, I'm a simple person, I like simple equations, and energy supply to me is very much around demand, less losses. And we look at that equation and we work on all those points and saying, how can we minimize the losses? How can we manage the demand and educate the demand and reduce the demand? And then we can then look at what's the right supply solution for the environment, the community. So how best do we energize those communities going forward to make sure that they've got the right level of supply, the right level of education? And I think that's a very much a partnership model that we have to take forward, rather than and lead, because the UAE in particular and the Middle East is being looked at from an African point of view as a strong partnership going forward in the energy space.
It certainly is, and with the great opportunities there. We're going to close out with back to where we started, and our host, Sharif Tawfiq, Chief Sustainability Officer for MIA for Microsoft. Sharif, wrap us up with your closing thoughts, please.
Thank you, esteemed guest. This was really enlightening. Thank you, Hanan, Justine, Chris, and definitely thanks to you, Sean, for bringing us together. As we heard, as we look for 2023, it is clear that the role of oil and gas industry in the energy transition will be pivotal, yet evolving one. We talked about methane reductions, decarbonization, importance of data, reduced costs of renewable energy, strides in the UAE for solar and green hydrogen, CCUS, economical opportunity, access to capital, the critical role of the Middle East, especially UAE and Saudi, to lead this energy transition. Collective action is needed for sure from different stakeholders, governments, regulators, policymakers, consumers, as well as tech and solutions providers. The oil and gas companies specifically will need to navigate those challenges of rapidly changing markets as the demand of fossil fuel will decrease and the investment in the renewable energies will increase. They will need to find ways to adapt and remain competitive and innovate in this new energy landscape. Finally, companies like Microsoft, which have already made significant commitments into sustainability, we released our Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability for emissions data intelligence technology, and we're availing resources to help accelerate the decarbonization and transition to the renewable energy to development of a low carbon economy. With that, I'm really thankful again for this podcast. Thank you, esteemed guest, and looking forward for future ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sharif, and thank you to all our guests for joining us on the Middle East and Africa Forum for Sustainability Leaders podcast. A really intriguing subject and that we're tackling today. Again, the question that we have been brainstorming to answer over the last 45 minutes. What is the energy transition role for oil and gas in 2023? We could certainly add 2024 on that, 2025, and certainly right through the rest of this decade, because it probably is the question of this decade. Certainly for this region, but also most importantly, as this region intersects with the great climate challenge that becomes part of the solution, this question and the answers to it become absolutely critical for the whole world. But thank you very much for joining this episode. All the best.